millions of dollars invested with nothing to show, drugs, and even death, you're going to want to hear what can only be described as Fire Festival meets the marijuana business meets a daytime soap opera. I'm standing outside what used to be the Venice location of the Genius Fund, a Los Angeles-based startup that was trying to carve out a chunk of the multi-billion-dollar California cannabis industry. Today, the doors are closed, the phones are silent. But just recently, the reality was a lot more colorful, with a Russian oligarch, a hemp operation the size of 750 American football fields, cooked books, and a $165 million investment blown. Sounds a little bit like Netflix's Ozark, right? I sat down recently with Tammy Abdullah from .LA to find out the details.
All right, Tammy, thanks so much for joining me. This is quite a story. So a Russian oligarch and two investors in their 20s come together to create the Genius Fund with the hopes of hitting it big. So take me back to the early days of the startup. What was it like in the company?
Thanks for having me, Kelly. Yeah, it was quite an experience reporting out this story. In the early days, the two execs in their 20s, they traveled every few weeks to places such as Forte dei Marmi in Italy to meet with their Russian investor and to party on yachts. One of the early execs, Ari Stiegler, he traveled at their investor's request to Russia and Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. And they created like a high life culture. One former employee told me that people were super optimistic in a, things are about to take off sort of way. It was also a time of really fast growth. .LA reviewed corporate records that showed their Russian oligarch investor, Dmitry Bosov, wiring over as much as $18 to $20 million every few weeks. Russian investors have flocked to the cannabis industry in the US, especially because traditional banks have shied away from it, given the fact that it's illegal federally, and the plant is actually also illegal in their homeland of Russia.
Wow, private jets and international travel sounds very flashy, very exciting. But
Yeah.
One employee told you not one person at the top knew what they were doing. So what were some of the cracks that began to appear that should have been red flags?
So the company was run by, two 20-something friends, Ari Stiegler, Gabriel Borden. They also had two Russian partners as well in the venture. But those two friends were mostly the operational leaders. And, I spoke with folks who told me that, the billionaire Russian investor, actually Stiegler told me that the billionaire Russian investor sought them out to run the cannabis company, despite neither of them having any experience in the industry whatsoever. The ex-CEO said in court papers that were filed after the company sort of came to an end, that Genius Fund grew 1.7 million pounds of pot. But, Ari Stiegler told me none of it was ever used in any of its products. It went into storage instead. In terms of hiring decisions, Ari Stiegler hired his roommates and frat brothers from the University of Southern California, some of whom he plucked out of jobs as a manager of a pizza joint, worker in a mailroom. In the ex-CEO's lawsuit that he brought, and it's a whistleblower retaliation suit, he alleges that Genius Fund executives spent money recklessly and that they bought both business and non-business items with corporate funds. Needless to say, though, employee after employee talked about just tons of money being spent, sometimes without even negotiation.
And in addition, it sounds like the team was potentially not well suited to the market based on their experiences. And indeed, product after product was developed, but never saw the light of day. And many of them, I was, of course, reading your piece, many of them were decent ideas too. So was it a lack of experience or something else?
Yeah, I spoke with a lot of former employees who were just really frustrated by their experience. They worked really, really hard, 80-hour weeks, and felt like after a year it was all for naught. And former employees weren't sure what was going on. I was told by many that they felt the company was mismanaged, and certainly their ex-CEO says so in his whistleblower lawsuit. But these former employees also told me there was a fairly frequent speculation as to how much money was being spent in a lucrative industry without profit And Stiegler told me the company was never profitable in its lifetime, despite $164 million invested in it.
Okay, so changing gears a little bit, your background is very apt for this next question. So what was going on in Little Plumas County?
So Genius Fund wanted its hemp farming operation, which it called Nature's Holiday, to become California's largest hemp farm. But early on, they started to attract some really negative attention from the local community. The then sheriff told me that his department started getting reports of men toting high-powered weapons, waylaying people on roadways near where they set up shop. And when the sheriff's department officials and county authorities paid them a visit, the sheriff said that security provided false credentials of being affiliated with law enforcement. And, Nature's Holiday employees told authorities that they had to burn young plants because they were infected with mites. So when, law enforcement showed up and asked where the plants were, well, they said, hey, we had to burn them.
So false credentials, weapons, mites, this story just keeps getting more unbelievable. And then finally, we have a plot twist at the end of this series. So Russian oligarch Bosov winds up dead in his home country of an apparent suicide. So how has that complicated matters with the Genius Fund's unwinding? And what are the rumors in Russia surrounding his death?
Yeah, so the Russian oligarch and billionaire, Dmitry Bosov, and he's 86th on the list of Russian billionaires. He has $1.1 billion fortune. And he died in early May of that apparent gunshot to the head. In Russia, the investigative committee has only looked at it as an apparent suicide or accident. But a family member told me that they wanted more investigations into whether there was foul play. The ex-CEO alleges in his lawsuit that the new owner of Genius Fund is trying to liquidate its assets, in part to evade creditors. But the multi-millions in assets, including property, land, vehicles, equipment, and that 1.7 million pounds of hemp are all listed as frozen assets for the time being. And you can read part 5 for more details on how this crazy story wraps up.
Wow, it certainly is indeed crazy, especially that 1.7 million pounds of hemp.
It's a lot. It's a lot of hemp. But they had massive aspirations, and they really hoped to dominate the cannabis market, in California and across the country and internationally even.
Well, this really is a wild one. Tammy, thank you so much for joining me, and everyone be sure to go check out all 5 installments on our website.
Well, there you have it, folks. Never a dull moment in the Los Angeles cannabis industry. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on how this crazy tale develops. I'm Kelly O'Grady, reporting for .LA.